Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. It's the new testing battlefields. We're going to be talking about mobile, Internet of Things, beyond embedded systems. I am Jim Holmes. I am the Master of Ceremonies here, the host if you will. I'd like to thank Progress and Telerik for hosting this. Here's an agenda for you today. First off, before I dive through this, I want to point out some logistical things. The session is being recorded. Also, the slide deck that you'll see, which is really just talking points. The main thing about today's WebEx is the conversation, but the recording, the slide deck, any notes, and some other follow-up information will be shared to all attendees via a follow-up email. That'll be coming out from the Progress folks. All right, so what's interesting in taking off? We'll be talking about things that are looking quite interesting in the domain. And this WebEx is about things that are different from web and desktop. So we're going to be talking about some of the critical differences for those particular areas, how it's different for testing, how it's different for usage. And this is a testing webinar. We'll be talking about things in the context of usage, how they're different, technical aspects. We'll have some closing remarks. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end. However, do feel free to drop questions into the question panel on your GoToWebinar little control panel there. We'll try to keep up as best as possible with the questions. Again, I want to reiterate that the recording, the slides, and follow-up material will be sent and made available to everyone. All right, so the next thing, today's panelists. There are four of us on here. Myself, I'm Jim Holmes. I am an executive consultant with Pillar Technology. I work at helping large organizations kind of update their testing abilities, whole team quality delivery, that sort of thing. At the moment, I am working with a large worldwide auto manufacturer on building autonomous vehicle things, which is quite interesting. I've also got Richard Bradshaw, Daniel Knott, and Ilyan Panchev, and I will leave their little intros to each of them. Richard, would you like to give a little intro, please?
Cheers, Jim. Hi, everyone. So my name is Richard Bradshaw, as Jim said. I'm a tester in the UK, and I also do a lot of public speaking and training, and I've been working on a mobile app for the last 2.5 years for a large telecoms company in the UK.
Thank you very much. Daniel, how about you, please?
Hi guys. Hi. Thanks, Jim. My name is Daniel Knott. I'm working as a senior tester engineer at the moment at Xing. It's based in Hamburg, Germany, and I'm working since 2010 in the mobile world and currently focusing mainly on Android. That's it.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Ilyo.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm Ilyan Panchev. I'm at the moment product manager for Telerik Test Studio and testing solutions. I've been QA for more than 10 years before that, and now I'm happy that I can help other testers with good tools.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's just dive right in. I want to talk a bit about things that are kind of taking off, things that may have been old. You know, mobile isn't new per se anymore, nor are embedded systems, but there are certainly new advances in what we're looking at. And then, of course, the Internet of Things is a big explosion these days. Daniel, I'm going to start with you. What are you seeing new on any of these categories or different things as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you already mentioned, mobile isn't new anymore. However, there are many companies still out there trying to catch the mobile train at the moment. So there are so many companies out there that are not ready for mobile yet because their backend systems may not be ready for that, or they even don't see any value in mobile. But this may be wrong, but they have to find out on themselves. But as you already mentioned, I think the next big thing was already there. It's like the Internet of Things. There's so many things out there that gets access to the Internet. Like, for example, last time I saw a wine bottle, like a startup from the US. They introduced a wine bottle that's connected to the Internet. It's kind of weird though, because there are so many weird things popping up that the use case is not clear at the moment, but it's definitely something we have to look for, and it's definitely changing our way we test at the moment.
A wine bottle that's connected. I haven't heard that
Yeah,
one.
I was also laughing when I was seeing it, yeah.
But, you know, so this is one of the interesting things. Sometimes crazy things just get thrown out, and,
Yeah.
you know, we sift through them to find interesting, useful things. Richard, what about you? What do you see as new and interesting?
Probably for me, I think it's just keeping track of all these home appliances, like you've said, toasters, and you know, there's that ongoing joke about your fridge talks to your toaster, who talks to your microwave, which tells your wife that you're in the pub. There's lots of these crazy little gadgets now that are going to be all over people's homes, and I think that from a usability and a testing point of view, it's going to be fascinating how they all talk to each other and work. Like, you know, you just put something in the oven and it exactly knows what it is you put in there and how it's going to cook it for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's crazy. The possibilities are crazy.
It is. Embedded is something that I've been interested in for a long time, from my early technical training years and years ago. And then also, so I put medicine up here because I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I depend on things like little small test devices and lots of machines to help me keep my health in order. And I'm always fascinated by knowing how the software is built in those, how they're being effectively tested. We'll talk about risk later on. Ilya, what sorts of things are you finding new and interesting? And you, as a product owner, have something that's a unique channel, which is what your customers are also asking for.
Yes, what I'm seeing is that it is really a fascinating world of new technologies and new things that need to be tested, and a lot of the testers are not prepared. This is what I see. They're not prepared for all this and all these places where you can use that you can test. It's everything built in different technology, and it's very hard for anyone to start testing everything at once. So it's a challenge for everyone to get started with testing of those things and to get the connection between them, because you cannot only test one of those things, you need to test your compatibility with all the appliances and all the places where your technology resides. So this is a huge challenge.
It's a very huge challenge, very huge challenge. And I think that actually is a good transition right to the next topic, which is there are definite differences in testing, and it doesn't matter if it's mobile or a toaster, an appliance, embedded, or something else. This is a dramatically different environment. Richard, what are some of you've been involved in this area for quite a while. What are some of the differences that you've run across? You may still be on mute, Richard.
I wasn't. I was thinking, sorry. I think, to me, the few things come to mind. So we've obviously got, you know, the clue's in the name with mobile. It's obviously mobile. So, you know, you're out and about, you're on strong signals, weak signals. That's definitely a challenging thing to test, and especially being in the office. So, you know, there's a good friend of mine called Dana Secure said it's a sin to test a mobile app at your desk. So I think that puts the message quite nicely that we need to get out and test those actually out in the field. Personally, I love testing my mobile app on the train and on the tube. It's fascinating on the train how your phone says you've got full signal when you can't even load a web page. So that's interesting. And then more obviously the hardware, that's, you know, significantly different. But I don't think that's too different from the past. You know, we used to care about hardware when we were testing desktop applications, but we kind of don't care too much anymore, well, not in the space that I've been working in. And then the other thing is just the fact it's someone's personal device, and, you know, they're getting calls all the time, they're trying to do a billion things at the same time. I think they pose real questions of how people are interacting with your applications.
I think that's a really good point. So one of the things that I've found as a huge difference is the lack of tooling, or rather mature tooling. You and I are both WebDriver fans and have a long background in that. And things like unit testing framework, continuous integration tooling, the ease of being able to spin up an end-to-end process that will do a number of tests or checks, however you care to define them, so that you can then go and spend your time very effectively exploratory testing or doing other activities. Those types of tools are not quite as mature in mobile, I don't believe. And I've been in embedded systems, even all the way back in avionics, for 10 or 20 years. There's nothing like that. Daniel, what sorts of things are you finding that are dramatic differences and things that people need to be aware of when they move into this environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the points Richard mentioned are really, really important. So it's really important to test like in the environment where the app is used later on. So I'm doing this as well, like sitting on a train and doing the testing for the app I'm currently working for. But other than this, there's something we should also keep in mind, of the people who step into mobile, is that mobile users are really, really engaged with their device and emotionally attached to the device. I mean, they have like an iPhone or an Android, and they customize it in the way they like it to have, and they want to have like high valuable devices basically, and then they also expect the same from the software running on those devices. So you find it easily if you go to the random Play Store apps or to Apple App Store apps and check some comments there. They get really pissed with like really, really minor changes you did in your apps, and this is also something you should consider when stepping in, that because mobile users are really emotionally attached to apps. It's sometimes frustrating when you open the App Store and you see the ratings and say, okay, why is this happening? It's not possible. Why is he writing that stuff like that? But on the other hand, as you already mentioned, the maturity of tools is not there yet, as for web, for example, but I think it's getting better. I mean, I started with mobile test automation in 2010, and at that time it was really, really bad. I mean, there was really rare tools out there, and the coverage of the functionality was also really bad. It's getting better. I mean, there are so many nice tools out there. It's Appium, Scalabash, and other tools for the various platforms. But still, the tools, they should support the testing. It's not about this like, oh, let's write automated checks like for everything. It's not possible. We all know that. But it should support us in testing the real stuff. And I think mobile testing requires lots of manual testing, and it's really, really important to do that. And the test automation should be a support role, I would say.
Jim?
I think that's a really good point. I think, you mentioned differences between automation, manual. I think in any well-delivered system, understanding test coverage is very important, so that you're not overlapping things, so that you're getting the right things at unit test, testing APIs, testing the UI. I think that's even more critical when you move into things like mobile, because you really have to be focused in on what you can effectively test with different tools, and then what you have to really be conscious of for your manual testing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Ilio, you as somebody who works with a test automation tool, what sorts of differences have you found here?
I, first of all, as a tester,
Yeah.
can say that for the mobile, I think that quality is even more important than web and desktop, because we are seeing a huge volume of mobile apps released, and it is very easy to download and to install a new app. So if you download an app and you are not happy with its quality in the first 10 seconds of the usage, you can easily delete it and go to the next app. So I think it is the quality is very critical and very crucial for the mobile world, because it is so easy to just get another app and forgot about the first app at all. So I think this is a major difference. It's not like on desktop you just release a service pack and you download and you subscribe for a software and you just use it because you don't have many more alternatives.
Absolutely.
For mobile you have a lot of alternatives and quality is very, very important here to stay on top of your business.
And it's also very interesting. Daniel, I think it was you that mentioned, or perhaps it was Richard, sorry, who mentioned, well, Daniel, so you mentioned it's very, they'll download an app and they'll throw it out after a few seconds. Someone had also mentioned how easy it is to write reviews. So you get the sea of reviews that very quickly tilts negative for small, tiny things like small updates and changes. So in a very fast fashion, you can build up an awful reputation that is going to be very difficult to dig out of if you haven't paid attention to ensuring you've got good quality there.
Absolutely, yeah. You must be sure that the stuff you've done is like really like tested with real users before, like do discovery phases is highly recommended. Just to find out that you built the right product, because otherwise it's like just a single tap away that users delete your app and go to the next step. Yeah.
And I also find this a fascinating, I don't know, dichotomy or contrast. As I mentioned, I've worked with avionics systems where, the idea that you have to have in your brain that this thing has to be top-notch quality, A, because it's going on to an aircraft and lives could be potentially at jeopardy, but B, you can't just easily release service packs or updates. In some of these cases, the version that goes into that embedded system is going to live with that particular device for as long as that device is around. You have to get it right. You can't ship or deliver with the idea of, we'll get it pretty good because we'll do a service pack. There's no such thing. And particularly when you get to something like medical devices, it's not just that there's a line of business cost, it's that lives could be at risk as well.
Yeah, sure. When I talk to people, I always make a nice journey for them, or like a nice picture. It's like whenever you release an app out there to the outside world, it's like burning a CD and put it into a magazine, and it's out there. You have almost no control in fixing that particular version. Of course, you can do an update for a next version, but still, users need to go to the App Store, need to update the app. And if I look into our apps at the moment, on Android, we have like up to 15 different Android versions out there by our users. So app versions that are older than 1 year now. This is really painful for us. And so you must be really sure to deliver high quality there.
Richard or Ilio, any more thoughts before we move on to the next topic?
I've got a few. I think it's interesting that, some places are changing now. So you see the funny pictures on social media of like people's cars refusing to drive because they're being updated. So I think, some companies are trying to move into this space of being able to do updates over the air. Like I know Tesla, for one, they're a big advocate of it. I also found an interesting article a while ago about Rolls-Royce engines, I think it was. Or it might have been General Electric's, I can't remember. But basically their engines are actually now limited by software. So they've actually built a more powerful engine, but they've limited it by the software. So when planes need bigger engines, they're actually ready to go, which I think is fascinating. And I can't remember her name, but it was she did a talk at a conference where she basically said they're a software company these days. They're no longer a manufacturer, they're a software company.
So that's fascinating. I've heard that same thing from other companies as well, that a manufacturing company who's used to making devices or big machines, and this entire change has shifted them over. Well, for example, the large auto company that I'm working with has a huge investment, and now software is very front and center for them.
Yeah, and I see
And
that.
also, and
Go
I've
ahead,
seen companies that are outsourcing their internal applications. They're not software companies, but at one point they decide to buy or to acquire some other outsourcing companies so that they can produce the applications in-house, because they see how important are those applications, even though they are not their main business. But all kind of businesses are now used to that mobile app thing, and are using a lot of that. So I see companies that just acquire huge other software companies just to work on their internal applications or external that complement their business. So it's very important. Yeah, it's important to have good quality software.
Very good. Thanks, Elio.
Before you move on, Jim,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we missed it. Well, you know, when you were mentioning tools earlier, I think one of the important things to acknowledge is, you know, you mentioned WebDriver. It took probably, you know, about 8 to 10 years before WebDriver, well, before browsers became stable, which has subsequently made WebDriver more stable. And, you know, you think about these operating systems for mobile, you know, I think iOS is only 9 years old. You know, and mainstream it's probably been, you know, heavily used only for like 5 or 6. So I think, you know, these platforms are still significantly shifting, that's making it hard for tool vendors at the moment. But I think that will slowly start to be less of an issue going forward.
That's a really good point. You know, things move so fast in our industry that I think we lose sight that it's still a very young industry, and practices are still maturing, and tooling always lags behind the technology and the practices. That's a very good point. All right, let's go ahead and move on and actually getting into some of the usage context around these things. You know, one of the particular things that I find fascinating in the embedded world, kind of an overlap between home appliances, Internet of Things, is the complex dependencies that we're seeing there, and the expectation of someone coming into their home and pushing a button on the refrigerator, and it's not perceived like their desktop system, where they expect a delay of that system starting up. There's instead, I should touch my refrigerator and I should be instantly able to do all of the things that I would want. And I find that fascinating. Daniel, I think you were talking about the speed that people look for interacting with these things. How do you feel that impacts kind of the approach to testing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I always take a look at the overall performance of our apps whenever we're going for a new release. So I usually compare the previous version with the new release candidate and see if transitions are still smooth enough, and see that all this stuff is working also on slower devices, but not also on high-end devices. Because, as you mentioned, it's really crucial for them. Users expect, I think I read it on statistics, that a mobile app should, for example, start within 2 seconds, and if it takes longer, there's a likely chance that they will delete the app from the phone and will go to the next one. So speed is really, really important to take a look at, I would say.
Ilya, what have you found interesting that lines up along these?
Well, yeah, it seems that performance testing is a real huge part of mobile world and mobile testing, and of course it's very challenging to. One of the challenging things also is to know what exactly the user will do, because you can do just so many things on your phone and with your phone while you're running your application. You can receive calls, other kind of interruptions, you can switch between apps, or you can do a lot of stuff. So it is very challenging to know all these actions and all those inputs and to test everything. So this is a huge challenge, and automation is a good thing, and automating some of those, but I think that at the moment I haven't seen very mature frameworks or tools that can help you automate all of those. And human touch is always something that that will come handy and will be needed into testing of those.
So that's really good, and that actually dovetails in with the question that we had from one of our attendees. So I'm going to go off on a tangent here for a moment. And the question was, what's more important in these kind of scenarios, focusing on full end-to-end testing or focusing on the functional side of the mobile? And I've got some thoughts here, but I'd like to hear from you other folks first. Richard, do you have any thoughts on this?
So what's more important? I would probably, I think a lot of these apps are internet-based now, so I think getting people's data is one of the most important things. So in terms of making sure that, their account and their data is in the right state, depending on what they're doing with the app. And then I think the interface is probably the next most important, mainly because most products these days are all the back end, it's all the data, it's all the knowledge that we have. Whereas now, you can have multiple interfaces to this one product. So I would probably focus more on the communication channels, making sure all the requests and testing things underneath such an interface, and then focusing on the interface after.
Sure, okay. Daniel, do you have any thoughts here?
Sure, I totally agree with Richard. I mean, many apps are like almost every app is relying on a backend system. So whenever the backend system is not there, most of the apps are useless, maybe except of games and stuff like that. But even those kind of apps are relying on the backend. If you think of in-app purchase of features, whatever that you need for gaming. So it's really, really important that the backend is rock solid, and then of course the API is tested properly. Whenever I talk to several people, like coming from web or stepping into mobile, in the mobile world, they don't use like proxies. I know, Richard, you're like really into proxies like JAWS and Fiddler and all this kind of stuff, and it's really, really useful. I just can recommend everyone to have this one installed on your computer and use it while testing. Like, check what's going on when the app is sending a request to the backend, or if you like manually send a request to the backend, and see how the backend is reacting on this kind of stuff. So API testing is key at the moment for mobile as well, but still end-to-end testing is also good to have it. I mean, you should really consider different layout changes, for example, or when you put the device into standby mode, for example, and leave it like it is, and then what happens when you return the device? Is it then fetching an update from the backend? Is the update delivered correctly? Is the UI shown properly and stuff like that? So you have to find a balance of your product in which stage you should test more and whatnot. So it's different for every app, I would say.
Daniel, that's terrific stuff. You mentioned APIs. Personally, I'm a huge fan of really working hard on automated checks, kind of for each subcomponent. So unit testing on the back ends, business layer, service tests to make sure that data is coming from a web API properly. And then the same on the mobile device side, right? If I can do unit tests and then some web tests or API tests on that mobile device, then that leaves my brain free to work with all of those crazy things. You mentioned putting something in standby and then popping that application back live and making sure it works correctly. That's one of those crazy situations that we just, how do you possibly automate a check around that? You can't. But it's got to be tested, and there are all of these other fascinating scenarios. Ilio, I know you've been involved with some API testing. What do you have around this that you think of?
Yeah, API testing is really important. I will agree here, and the good thing is that it is easy to automate. It is easy to run without watching over, and usually these tests are really fast, unlike the UI tests. So it is a very good thing to find the balance between both and run your API tests to be sure that everything on your backend and everything with your services is working. And meanwhile, you can verify those UI or your UI and those edge scenarios that one automated test would hardly catch if there is a problem.
Thank
So
you.
combination of manual exploratory testing and API automation and maybe some UI automation for your basic scenarios, because you need to know that your basic scenarios, your basic UI is working without crashes, without any deviations, and this is also a good thing to automate, to be sure that you have one baseline of quality, one minimal quality, and from now on you can test all the complex scenarios exploratory or manually.
All right. So we actually started diving into some of the technical aspects here, which is absolutely fine. We've talked about API testing. We've talked a bit about the data. So I'd like to hear from the other panelists here a bit on tooling. And I realize the discussion has been around a lot of mobile, and that's fine. Let's cover that mobile stuff, and then we can maybe pull back to other tool sets that folks are using in different areas. Richard, what sorts of tooling are you finding helpful, either for automated checks or frankly even for doing exploratory work? Just because it's manual doesn't mean that we don't use tools.
No, definitely. So as Daniel mentioned, I'm a big advocate of pushing people to use proxies because, again, I think for me it's virtually impossible to test my app without using a proxy because I've no idea what data it's sending. I've no idea how many times it's sending a request. I don't actually know what data it's getting back. So I actually don't know if it's showing me the correct data because I can't see it unless I go straight to the database and look there. But even then I'm having to trust that the app is showing the right thing, because for me the best apps in my opinion are the ones that do very little. So most of the logic's controlled by the API, so they get some data and they present it. So for me using a proxies is great. Also from a testing point of view, the proxies you can alter the data, which means making different test cases very quickly, or test scenarios. You can practice the status error codes, you can test those really easily. And then in terms of other tools, I'm using Android Debugger Bridge quite a lot to make lots of little nice scripts to deploy my app, to clear my data, to log me out, remove the app, restart the device. So all these little scripts are really good. And then probably the best thing I've built is a script that will install my app on all the devices that are connected, because that just saves me hours of time. So I actually make it install on all the phones that are connected. It then starts my app. It then logs me into the app using a different account for all different devices so that I can then test. Normally takes me about half an hour manually. It takes me about 2 minutes. It takes the script about 2 minutes. So I normally make a cup of tea while it's doing it.
Well, that's terrific and that's critical. Richard, I'm going to ask you to go off on a bit of a tangent. Some folks might not understand the use of proxies. Would you mind chatting that up for a moment, because this is a tremendous concept that's an extraordinary help.
Yeah, so the idea of a proxy is, in simple terms, it's like a man in the middle. So instead of you going straight from your device to your server, you go from your device to a proxy running most of the time on your laptop. So you route it via that proxy. The proxy will then show you everything, so it will show you all the requests that your device has made, and then it will forward them onto your server. And then as the response comes back, it will show you the response, and then it will forward it on to your device. So you can literally see all the status call, all the calls, the statuses, the headers, the JSON, the XML that's being sent, and it's really useful because, as I said, you can then manipulate it. So there's like Fiddler, which obviously is a Telerik tool now, and there's Charles Proxy. So these tools are actually, for me, vital. So if you haven't played with a proxy, I suggest you try and connect one up and actually see what you can see. See what your app sends. It might be surprising.
They're a great educational tool. Even like you said, even if you're not trying to do specific tasks in mind, just seeing what's going across the wire is a crucial piece there.
Well, there's a great. So literally from this morning, Jim, I had an issue where this back-end APIs had changed one of our headers, so we had to send a specific header. Now, I didn't have a version of the app ready that was sending that header, and my developers are in Canada, so they don't come online till like 3 o'clock UK time. But I was able to use a proxy, capture that request, alter the header, and then send it on. So I was able to carry on testing.
That's terrific. For developers in the audience, you can think of a proxy as really a mock. It sits in the middle. You can define behavior if you need, and that's a tremendous story right there, Richard, because you can press on getting your work done even if the system's broken.
Yeah, and there's lots of different proxies out there too. There's proxies that do security for you, so they'll try and manipulate your request to try and find some flaws. And there's just ones that will do, there's a really cool one called Chaos, which basically just kills random requests. So it will just randomly drop requests so you can see how your app behaves then.
Terrific. Daniel, you have any thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm working in the Android end world, so I'm using also ADB for that. Like Richard mentioned, I also wrote a script for that, like to easily distribute the app to all our connected devices. Lately, I also set up this open smartphone test farm. It's an open source project in our company. I also wrote a blog post on my blog on that. I can refer later on in the article in my to that link too. So it's basically like building up your own in-house device farm and can easily connect to Android Studio to the devices and debug on a certain device, like different Android API levels and stuff like that. Really useful, really easy to set up. It's really worth looking into it. Besides that, I'm quite often use Monkey for Android. Like it's also built in ADB. It's coming with the Android Studio and the Android SDK, and you can generate like random touch and input possibilities to the app and try to crash the app or to try to execute like lots and lots of inputs at the same time and see how the app reacts. It's fun to watch, easy to set up, and it's really, really powerful to use. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Elio, thoughts here from you?
Yeah, the using of proxies is really very good thing and can help in a lot of scenarios. And I'll add one a little bit more different scenario. And this is when you are supporting your customers. For example, this is from our team, a story from our team. For example, we have a customer that has an issue, and we cannot reproduce it at our end, but he cannot provide his web application, let's say, to us because it's something internal. We just ask him to record his traffic with Fiddler, and then he sends it to us, and voila, we have his traffic and his application in our end, and we can use it to reproduce the issue. So sometimes this proxy recording can be very useful if you have customers that you need to support, but you don't have access to their applications.
Very good. So we've had, everybody here has mentioned data as well, either mocking out the proxy or whatever. We've had a couple questions about tools for working with data. This isn't necessarily specific to the IoT embedded, but data generation is a critical task for all testing. I thought it was a useful question to bring up. Do any of you have favorite tools that you use for data generation, or is this something that you tend to do by hand? Daniel, I'll start with you.
At the moment, so basically our company is using like completely open source tools, so we don't have like a specific tool from a tool manufacturer currently in use. and we have our own tailored tools in place basically, so we can easily use REST APIs in order to generate our test data on the fly. So this is really cool. So like we are like a social network, and we can generate like test users on the fly in our sandbox systems or on the station systems. So this is really easy, and yeah, it's crucial to use. I mean, you just send a REST call to the backend, it's generating the user, doing all the stuff that you need to do, and then you can use the test data right for the testing, and afterwards you can just drop it again from the database, and it's just perfect. But yeah, you have to build. So we build it on our own, and it's highly customized for us. So nothing I can share there.
Yeah, but you mentioned a good point about starting with open source tools. So particularly for API testing, there are a number of REST API tools. For data generation, some of you may know of the Faker framework, F-A-K-E-R. It's available for .NET, Ruby, Java. I think there's a Python implementation. And that's a really easy API to use for generating up very realistic data. It supports global phone numbers, for example, so that the format in the UK can get generated, and I can do phone numbers in the US or postal codes. And it's got a lot of really interesting opportunities. Richard, do you have anything that you enjoy for using for data tools?
Yeah, definitely a few things. So again, I've blogged about this so I can share it. So I'm a big fan of the data builder pattern. So the idea is you write logic, you write code a bit like obviously Daniel's solution, but you write custom code for your product where you basically teach something how to create data. So let's say you need a user with an admin profile. You would write code that says, do I have a user in my database with an admin profile? If there is one, give it back to me, and then I'll use it in my testing. If there isn't one, I want you to go and create one for me so I can then use it to test. So if you build up that kind of framework, it's really cool to use. So one of the things obviously most people use it when they're doing their automated checks, but I also like to wrap an API on it so I can integrate it with other tools such as a desktop application, or very recently I integrated it into Slack so my product owner could create data. So he actually spoke to a Slack bot, and then that hit my API and sent him back a user which he could use. So that's pretty cool. And then a bit like you said with Faker, part of our system at the moment is quite hard to create data, so I basically mocked it out. I wrote my own mock in Node.js that I use instead of the APIs, so I can control my data, and now I can test my app without having to worry about the back end.
Terrific. There's been a couple questions dealing with JSON in the Q&A stream, and I just wanted to point out that there are really good JSON libraries that basically allow you to query JSON. There's Newtonsoft for .NET. There are a number of good libraries both for Java and Ruby. I'm sure Python has something. So every major platform stack will have a good open source tool that you can grab and really treat your JSON objects almost like a database, if you will, and easily query into them. So I just wanted to pass that out. Ilio, so Telerik's being gracious enough to host this. I want to give a shout out to you. I know that Test Studio is going to be pulling out some releases with some API testing, and I'd like to give you just a moment or two to chat about those before we move on.
Yeah, at the moment we are heavily working on our new API testing tool, which will be a standalone tool and as well part of Test Studio. And we are releasing our first beta version at the end of the month. So anyone who wants to play with it and give us some feedback, it's free to do it. And I'll be very happy if I get some feedback from you guys and from our attendees on this webinar, so that we can make a better tool.
Terrific. Yeah, so you know, Telerik by Progress has been long.
I'll definitely send you the tool, Jim, to play with it. and to test it.
Sure. And that's one of the things that we can put out in the follow-up information as well, that, how to look at this, how to get some feedback, and reach out for that. So, okay, I'm just looking back through the through the window here for some questions. Oops, got one too quick there. So I think the notion here of breaking the system apart, how to model the systems, regardless of whether it's a mobile and a back end, or something that's embedded or IoT, how do we look to effectively model the system? Richard, what are your thoughts around really approaching a system to test it effectively and model things?
Yeah, so I absolutely love modeling. I think it's something that testing communities don't talk about enough. So for me, most people may know if they follow me, I love my whiteboard. So I tend to start by drawing a very high level model. So, I'll basically draw a few big boxes. I'll have a UI, API, and then a database. And then I'll basically expand into those areas and start adding different things. So if it was a mobile app, I might start modeling the screens. For the APIs, I'll model multiple APIs that there is. And the same for the database. I'll start modeling how many tables there are or how many collections there are. And if it was an IoT device, then obviously I'd be interested with how many inputs or how many buttons there was or toggles that I could actually press or play with. And the reason I do it is mainly so for a few reasons. It helps me design test ideas so I can get a flow of the system. We've mentioned a lot about tools. It helps me identify where to build tools. So once I've drawn such a model, I can draw system boundaries on the model. So I can see that there's a set of APIs that immediately tells me that's something I can see, something I can fake. So that's really interesting to tell, and the same with the database. But also more importantly in the IoT and the mobile space, I can actually start thinking about things like analytics and monitoring. So I can actually ask for things to be put in place so that I can see what's going on in our systems. Because without it, again, we're just blind. It's hard to really know what your system's doing.
So really being able to break it down and understand the data flow and the actions, yes?
Yeah, if I have that model, like as you said, it allows me to see where data flows, to see the different, to see where the boundaries are. It allows me to have conversations with the product owners and the developers and actually have something we can all refer to, which is really useful.
Daniel, how do you approach that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing what we are doing. I mean, our app is like 6 years old now, but still, you have to refactor stuff, and then when we start thinking of refactoring certain areas of the app, is it either the app, or is it the API, or is it the backend? For sure, we sit together and then we start modeling, like Richard mentioned, like draw pictures basically. It's really, really important to do that, because then everyone is on the same page, has a clear understanding of how the system is looking and what kind of stuff we need to send, what kind of stuff we need to receive, and this is really helpful because writing just like user stories or like tickets in Jira or whatever is out there is also okay, and it's required for doing stuff, but still if you have something to look at, it's way easier and it gets you thinking about certain ways. As also Richard mentioned, I use it a lot also to generate my testing ideas basically. I draw something, and then while I'm drawing I see, okay, this is something I have to dig into, or this is something I have to ask to, and it's an ongoing process basically, and it's really helpful for the whole team. It's a collaborative work, and it's really worth doing.
Nice thing to add on, Jim.
Sorry, go ahead.
Another piece, a nice thing to add on as well is once you've got such a model, it can be really good to actually, if you do have a lot of automated checks in place, you can stick them on your model so you can see where you've got coverage, where you haven't got coverage. The same when you're doing exploratory testing, depending how you track it, you can start applying that onto this model. Obviously, the model isn't foolproof. No model is correct. All models are wrong, but it gives you something to view and something to start conversations from.
Exactly.
Two things that you mentioned there that are just so important. Well, the both of you did really. It's about the conversations more than the diagrams that you end up with on the whiteboard or in PowerPoint or Visio. And then I mentioned it earlier, I can't emphasize it enough, the criticality of understanding where your automated checks are so that you can make your coverage as effective as possible. I firmly don't believe in automating an end-to-end check because it's so difficult to try to get from a phone to a database on a back-end server. But if I understand where the coverage is, because we've modeled things and we've had those good conversations and we know where we've got the automated checks at, then it's an easy thing for me to figure out where I spend my time with those difficult things that really turn out to be the high value flow.
So my colleague Mark, he came up with a good acronym the other day, which was TUTU. Are you testing the UI or are you testing through the UI? So, you know, it's really important. You can do the same for the API, do TATA. Are you testing the API or are you testing through the API? If you realize you're testing through something, then you can try and mitigate it and move it down the stack to make it as focused as it can possibly be.
You tweeted something about that, I believe, because I remember that phrase. It's a terrific phrase. Are you testing it or are you testing through it? Well done. All right. We are getting close to the end here. I want to take a few moments for closing thoughts from everyone, and then we'll leave a few more moments for catching up with Q&A from the audience. Ilio, I'd like to start with you. What do you have just in general thoughts as we're wrapping up here? Anything strike you in particular?
Yeah, in general, my advice is for everyone is to not to go into automating everything, or I won't automate anything, I'll just manually test. Everyone needs to find the balance between both, and it's very important to automate smart, to automate what it makes sense, and not make automation something that you should do at any cost. Because sometimes you just lose more time automating something that can be tested real quickly, and it is very important to know which of your modules, which of your features need automation and needs to be automated for future, so that that automation can just do some regression testing, and it is very important to find a balance between all the automation, API testing, QA testing, manual testing. So I want to advise anyone who is starting a testing project just to think of that before start doing it and to plan it wisely.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. Daniel, any thoughts on closing?
Yeah, I mean, what Ilya said is pretty important, that focusing on the technical part is really crucial, but don't overdo it with that. I mean, it's so many things you have to consider, especially for manual, like the whole manual stuff. But there's another thing that everyone should keep in mind, is that watching the market. I mean, we should like constantly watch out for new things. I mean, there were like the big two keynotes, like this week with WWDC, and there was the Google keynote. You have to be on the news technologies to just watch out for the market and see what new stuff is coming out and how to react on that. How is this influencing my testing? How have to I adapt my testing? Because if you don't adapt your testing and your workflow and the way you test, you maybe will stop the competition at the end. So we will lose in the end. So you have to be at the very top notch, basically.
Well said. Things are moving very fast. Great comment. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I think for my closing comments, I think it's really important to remember that, you know, it's a human's life that we're trying to improve with most of this technology now. You know, in the past, the web, you know, it used to be, you know, help businesses get along and help, you know, humans and users do a few things. But as Daniel mentioned earlier, these phones are really personal to people these days. and now it's an integral part of their life. So we really need to think about how we interact with such devices, IoT devices going forward, mobiles going forward, and that's the kind of thing that we can't automate. So we need to start thinking critically, trying to think of some testing that incorporates, how a human wants to use a product, but then importantly use the tools where we can to help us, with that process.
Well said, and that is a wonderful distinction. Mobile devices are personal, absolutely. I think it's fascinating how the embedded systems are coming up more and more, particularly as we look to, not just mobile devices and Internet of Things, but the work I'm doing with automobiles these days is fascinating, and appliances, Internet of Things. There are light bulbs that hook to controllers which are using your home network to broadcast to other devices. And the interdependencies of those I find fascinating and also, frankly, a bit terrifying, because you have to get it right the first time. So understanding risk and how to test that, and understanding that human that you're trying to make happy when you literally turn on a light bulb and it does a pre-programmed color or something for them, it is really neat. So let's see. I think we've gotten through all the closing comments. I want to thank everyone who joined on. We're going to take a few moments for some wrap-up Q&A here in the question queue. But I do want to thank everyone who has attended here. Don't jump off yet. We're going to get some interesting discussion around topics for about another 4 minutes. And I want to remind everyone, first off, that the recording will be available. The slide deck will be available. All of us who've participated in the discussion here will have follow-on blog posts. We will be mailing you, or rather Telerik and Progress will be mailing out some follow-up information. Okay, so let me start with some of the Q&A here. Actually, there's a really interesting point here, which kind of went back to the interaction of apps, particularly notifications. So your app may generate notifications, but how is that interacting with other apps on a mobile device of some type, which may cause interference? Do any of you have thoughts on that?
I mean, definitely you should test possible interruptions on your app. I mean, when your app is doing something, processing data, and a phone call is coming in, or messages popping up, and display notifications showing up, or an alarm is going, definitely something you should look into it, and it's really, really cool to do so. Same as I already mentioned is the standby testing and sleep mode testing. Test all this particular stuff. It has a high impact on your data that is being processed on the UI, on the backend as well. So you have to keep an eye on that, and it's highly manual. I tried to automate once some notification, like push notification testing, but it was not worth the effort because it was not really reliable at all. So again, manual.
And one advice from me here, because yeah, it's purely manual work, this, and there is not much creativity. Maybe there is some, but calls, SMS, emails, other kind of notifications, most of them are well known. So I would advise anyone doing it to make a cheat sheet and to make a document with all those interruptions, and when they need to be tested, just to go through them, because there are a lot of interruptions that can be missed when you just test it exploratory. So I think there should be some order when testing this.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need order as well. And also, there is tools out there that can help, but not necessarily the help people are thinking. So, there is online providers that would send a call to your phone. You could use the web version of WhatsApp and send messages to your phone that way. Or there's online sites that you can send text messages via. So those things can, help speed up your testing. instead of having two devices side by side trying to text one from the other. Or,
That's a typical picture of the mobile tester, isn't it? You're sitting in front of a desk and you've got 8 or 10 or however many devices, and you're madly typing away on all of them.
exactly. And the same with the notifications. So we have an API that we can hit that would send a notification to our app. So, you know, that speeds the process up as well.
Right, and I think that's a good point, is that sometimes you need to spend that engineering time to build up those tools, either to test your system well or frankly, to make your system more testable. You know, it's not just all monkey pushing of devices, it's understanding the tooling that you need to build to make things more effective.
And I think how we said earlier about the modeling, that's where that becomes really important. And then one of my favorite questions to ask is always, how are we going to test this?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's where we can start identifying tools and checklists and things that can help us.
And those questions need to be asked before anybody puts their hands on the keyboard, because that way everybody's time is saved and you can make a much more effective design.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So great discussion. All right, so one more topic and then we'll bring things to an end, because I think we're right at the top of the hour. I've had several questions in the queue which are basically talking about cross-device automation. So what tools have you been using to help with automating on different mobile devices? And we are starting to run a bit beyond the top of the hour, so I'll ask everybody to be a little concise, please. Richard?
So in terms of automation, as I said, we personally have none on the UI, but we have a lot on the unit level and we have a lot on the API level. Tools that I've tried to play around with are Appium to try and get some UI stuff, but I've also started using Applitools, to name the tool, but basically UI checking tools, which are becoming quite popular now because they can really actually test the visual aspect.
Right. Thank you very much. Daniel?
Yeah, pretty much the same. So we do also lots of interface testing and API testing, and as well as backend. So we share the same backend. So we have like the same tool for everything in that place. But when it comes to like iOS and Android, we have no shared code base at the moment because our apps are different from the UI perspective, from the UX perspective. So in that case, we use the tools for the right platform. So on iOS, we are now using Calabash for iOS, and Android still Espresso, and yeah, it's working quite well, and no experience so far with cross-platform automation mobile as well.
Okay, great. Thanks. Ilio?
Well, I don't know if it's going to be a surprise, but we test Studio with Test Studio. so yeah, it's
yeah, and
it's something that we do both things. We test Studio and automate testing the real application, but while we are creating those tests, we are testing manually again.
Sure.
So it's nice. It's a fun thing.
Okay.
I'll quickly bring up one point, Jim, that I think is really important in this space is obviously, you know, the more devices you try and run your automated checks on, the more issues you're going to run into. So it's really important to do the analysis, use your analytics, try and narrow it down to a small set of devices, and get your automation regularly, running on those as good as it can.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a crazy matrix of hardware, of operating systems on that hardware, of browsers on the operating systems on the hardware. You have to understand your target market. I think also some of the combinatorial tools can help you deal with those matrices as well, things like hexawise or all pairs, but you have to be careful about thoughtfully selecting what you're going to test. Okay, so I know we've run past. Richard, Daniel, Ilio, thank you so much for your time. I'd like to give a big shout out to Progress, Telerik by Progress, and the Test Studio folks for hosting this discussion. I hope you found it highly useful, and with that, we're going to sign off. Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers, Jim. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.